I am coming to this interview as a fan, a big Sting fan, and that's why I read the book. And so I assume I'm hoping it'll be a different interview than, say, someone who writes for Guitar World and they just want to. Well, what are your thoughts on the new PV bass amp? You know, I wanted it to be more about the content of this book. It's a funny book, Jeff. I read it for the adventure stories, but you're a funny guy. I mean, I don't want you to feel obligated to be funny in the interview, but your eye for detail is marvelous, man. The things that you clearly came at it from somebody who was absorbing it all, like, holy cow, I'm playing guitar with Sting, and you're playing guitar with Sting as a fan. So
yes.
Let me back up and just as a jumping off point. My buddy and I waited for Sting tickets to see the show at the Carrier Dome in 1988, February. So this was winter in Ithaca, New York, and about an hour and change from Syracuse. So we were like the only ones who were really on the line. An all-nighter, 14, 15 hours of waiting in the cold, you know, like, I'll get hot chocolate. No, I'll get it. And we got sixth row as a result of this endeavor, this Shackleton level undertaking in the Ithaca winter. But so we got sixth row, and I remember we could see you. You didn't look much older than us. And I was trying to picture, like, what's going through this guy's head. He doesn't look any older than we are. And he's touring with Sting. I remember watching the show and like, how did this happen? What is his life like? And also I was thinking, does he appreciate it? And I got the answer 38 years later, whatever it is, you know, that yeah, you appreciate it. You were a fan. So I'd love to jump off from that point.
Well, but part of the reason I wrote the book is because people would say, how the hell did you get this gig? And it was so convoluted, like most things in life, with a lot of luck involved, you know, hard work and luck, that I finally thought, oh, let me write this down. It's easy to explain, because it was, you know, a crazy trajectory to end up with that gig. And yes, I was a huge Sting fan. I remember standing at the record store, my nose pressed against the glass, waiting to buy Synchronicity on vinyl. You know, I mean, it was like, I remember hearing Every Breath You Take for the first time on the radio, going, wow, that's kind of different, you know? And it's like, so I was a huge fan. I saw the Ghost in the Machine tour, loved it, thought it was so great.
Yeah.
So I was a huge fan. And as I recount in the book, through, you know, we won't have to get into the details now, but how I ended up with Sting. I mean, when I first, you know, I remember sitting in a movie theater in North Carolina where I grew up watching Bring on the Night with my mouth hanging open. I thought Daryl Jones, Branford Marsalis, Kenny Kirkland, Omar Hakim were the coolest guys I'd ever seen.
Yeah.
A year later, I'm working with Branford and Kenny. I've met Daryl. I'm hanging out with Sting, and it was like hitting the lottery. It was crazy. But that's the way life works, right? It's just, you know, you show up and see what happens, and you got to be lucky.
Yeah, I think that you have to be willing to be lucky. I like that line, but also, you know, it's the opportunity of preparation and luck. I think opportunity. It's that crossroads, they say.
Yeah. You know, and that's I address it in the book that, and I don't mean to be self-deprecating. I mean, I think of my skills as being average, and people think that I am being self-deprecating. I go, no, I've been around great musicians, Kenny Kirkland being one of them. And it's amazing how talented these guys are. I always say to people, I don't know if you ever saw Amadeus, but I always say, hey, I feel like Salieri on a good day compared to some of these guys. They're so amazingly talented. But what I've found is some of the talented guys I know are kind of lazy because things come so easily for them. I'm not saying that of Kenny, but so because of my, what I consider to be earthbound skills, I have to work really hard, but hard work will get you a long way. Work ethic. I mean, there's a great quote by President Calvin Coolidge saying that history is littered with talented derelicts. It's like perseverance is what really gets you there. The talent is common, you know? So, and I always point out, I say, when you get talent and work ethic, you get Prince, you get Stevie Wonder, you
Mhm.
get Tiger Woods, you get Michael Jordan, these guys that clearly were wired at the factory to do what they're doing,
Mhm.
and they've worked really hard. So it's that's a
And
special combination. But
yeah, and it's got to be a delight for them to work with people who are like-minded. They're you know they have that drive. They're in it for the long haul. They didn't just wander into it. It wasn't like a distant plan B. They live and breathe music.
right, yeah.
Um,
Well, and I think Sting falls into that category of being very talented, but he's, you know, people think he's got a huge ego, but I found him to be very humble, because a guy with a weak ego would not surround himself with Branford Marsalis and Kenny Kirkland, you
right.
know, Mar Hakim, Mino Sinaloo. He'd be like, I don't want these guys showing me up. But either Sting's ego was so large that he's like, I'm not threatened, or either he was so humbled. And it's been my experience that the guys that have really worked at it, they're kind of humble because they know how hard it is to be really good at something.
Yeah, you know it reminds me. You mentioned in the book Dennis Chamber had to honor a
Yeah.
commitment with I think I forget who it was, but he had to say no to Sting, which I remember I like the way you had put it, where you just thought people drop what they're doing. Like, hey, look, I'm about to leave for a tour, but as long as you asked, I'll cancel that tour. Like, they have to honor their commitments, and you know, we don't think of Sting as somebody who's used to hearing sorry, no. You know,
Well, we had been assembling the band, had been rehearsing for a few weeks. We'd already done, I guess we'd done Saturday Night Live and the Palladium, a show in New York. And
mhm.
then we were still rehearsing. Then one day, Dennis Chambers, no, I guess that's not true. Maybe that did happen before. Yeah, it did happen before the Palladium and Saturday Night Live. I apologize. But I thought the drummer was set with Smitty Smith, Marvin Smitty Smith. And then one day, Dennis Chambers walks in. And as I mentioned in the book, I'm like, well, this guy's a superstar. Sting just had a rough time with the Blues Turtles superstar. I discussed that some in the book, how, you know, Sting's first band, you're dealing with guys. I mean, Omar Hakim, he played on Let's Dance. He played on
Mhm.
Like a Virgin. How do
Mhm.
you get that guy's attention? You know, if
Weather
I had
report,
half of
yeah,
his discography,
yeah,
yeah, yeah, I know. That's what I'm saying. Just amazing. So
yeah.
I think Sting had time. I had a little bit of trouble maybe keeping those guys in line at time, or not in line, but they just weren't going to be overwhelmed by the situation.
Yeah, they're
As
not
I joke in the
sidemen.
book, no, and
They're
they're not. And
yeah.
as I joke in the book, I think part of the reason I got hired is because management, after the Blue Turtles experience, may have been looking for a few submissive nobodies to go,
Right.
yes, sir, whatever you say, sir.
Right. They had the collective bargaining superpower because they were all, I think you said, had the same agent, so they could, you know, in the movie Bring on the
Yeah.
Night, Miles Copeland, you know, who you mentioned in the book, and he must be just such a like a hurricane of power. But in the movie, I think he's explaining the pay rate where, like, look, if Daryl Jones can't show up, nobody's gonna say, oh, I don't want to come to the
Right.
show. But if Sting cancels, that's a whole other thing.
Correct.
Were
It's
you
funny. The way when I first met, Sting first saw me play was at the Umbria Jazz Festival in Italy. I was there with Delmar Brown's Bush Rock. And it's this 2-week jazz festival in Perugia, Italy. And I remember walking through the city square one day and I saw Miles Copeland sitting on a bench all by himself. And I wanted so much to go over and talk to Miles because I just loved the Police. I loved Bring On the Night.
Mhm.
But I couldn't work up my nerve to speak to Miles. And then after I got to know him, I was like, boy, I'm glad I didn't go.
Right.
I didn't approach him because he barely treated me with respect when I was working for the band, much less
Right.
a stranger. So he is as Sting's line, I always remember, he said, Miles is down at the beach scaring the sharks. You know, that's kind of what Miles does.
That's hilarious. I'd never heard that line.
Yeah.
That's very funny. I was gonna before we jump along. I saw Bring on the Night in the theater, and I remember when I got out of the theater, I went to the box office and asked for the owner, and I said, "Can I have the poster?" And he's like, "Write down your name, and I'll think about it." And then I went back and I got the poster. Like, nobody else had asked for it. It's one of those things in life. I mean, I was 14 or whatever. It's just these little moments where you have the audacity to ask. And this was a big poster. This wasn't like your regular movie. I think they come in gigantic and more giganticer. This is the size of a garage door, this
Right.
poster. It's from a theater in Bronxville.
Wow. You
And
still have it? Do you still have it?
Yeah, I have it. I have it. It's rolled up. I can't afford a frame the size of a garage door, you know, but it's, yeah, I have it. It's in great shape. I would never
Well,
sell it.
as I mentioned in the book, we were playing in Paris, and my parents flew over from the United States to visit in Paris. And I talked my parents into sitting in the wings during the show because they're like, "Oh, you've been in the audience before. Sit in the wings."
Yeah.
And at one point, I look over, my mom's sitting on a road case, and Jake, who was born at the end of Bring On the Night, this is like 2 years old at this point, and he's sitting in her lap, and I'm going, "Wow, I just remember watching this movie of this kid being born, and now here's my mother in Paris
Yeah.
holding him in her lap." It was just mind blowing.
That must be so surreal. Like, and it's also like they're characters in a movie a couple of years earlier, and they're like, "What? This kid's real. It's real." You know. Did you
Yeah.
did
I know.
you
Well, again, go ahead.
well, please.
No, I was just gonna say that's what I'm saying. To see Branford on a movie screen and then
Yeah.
hang out with him all the time just was mind blowing to me.
And it was fun to see the way they're playing the Flintstones theme and the way they're kidding around with him. It's pretty cool. Did you collect, like it taught me how to be a fan where I would chase these 45s, with my newspaper route money and shoveling driveway money and get the 45s for the B-side, which was something that was a non-LP song. Some of these wound up on the tour, like Low Life was on, the Dream of the Blue Turtles tour. Were you that much of a fan? I know you had to do a deep dive for learning the catalog for the audition. And I know that Sting would pull out a nugget at like sound check. And had you chased the B-sides?
Well, I hadn't chased the B-sides, and it's funny because in my book, I erroneously say that we used to cover Squeeze's Tempted in our show. And I said, but Sting never released Tempted. Believe me, I've heard from plenty of readers. Sting has released Tempted as a B-side. I didn't keep up with it. I'm actually, at first I was kind of embarrassed that I didn't know this. And then the more I thought about it, I was like, hey, this is good. It shows I'm not sitting around being a Sting collector after the fact. I moved on with my life. He moved on with his life. But I knew that King of Pain had been released on a B-side CD single of All This Time for Soul Cages. But I've heard from tons of readers saying, no, he released this and this. So I was not, it's an interesting dynamic. I was a huge Police fan. I loved the Dream of the Blue Turtles. Then I became Sting's employee. And there's an interesting dynamic where, and I discuss it in the book, where you have to be a peer. So whether or not you feel like a peer or not, you have to behave like a peer. Yeah. So I had to put my starstruck feelings aside and make Sting believe that I deserve to be on stage with him. So that kind of fandom, you have to just put it in a box and put it on a shelf, compartmentalize the fandom and become a peer worthy of his respect. So I didn't. And then once the tour was over and he moved on and he hired Dominic Miller, and Dominic's now been with him 32 years or something like that, which is amazing. God bless Dominic. My hat is off to him. But it's funny how people assume that I'm still into the deepest cuts on Sting's records. I'm like, he's moved on with his life. I've moved on with mine, Like people come and say, hey, you want to go see Sting? I'm like, if he calls me and invites me, I'd be happy to go. But I'm not going to go buy a ticket and sit in the balcony watch Sting play. I played 181 shows with him.
Right.
Yeah.
I
mean, there's no bad blood. We're still. I love the man dearly, but sometimes I make the analogy of people's like, you don't keep pictures of your divorced wife hanging on the wall. You move on with your life. Sting and I went separate ways, and
I did enjoy reading.
The last show. Yeah.
It was like a happy ending in the book. To learn that it was a clean sweep of the entire band, like a new sound for the next record. He probably would have heard if it was just like, everybody's coming back except for you, Jeff, like it was just a clean sweep of everybody at every instrument. It became a new band. We were talking about, you were mentioning, where you had to operate as a peer. I love the part where you were saying you took your cues from Kenny, who kind of hung back, and Branford, like they have an effortless cool, but Sting at some point like shake your ass. You know, let's see some
Yeah.
some action out there. And your instincts were probably correct, where you're like, well, I'll do what the professionals are doing. But he wanted more, you know, showbiz.
Well, and I discuss it in the book that I even wonder, as he's yelling at me personally, maybe he's really mad at Branford and Kenny for their super coolness, but he's not going to yell at them. And as it turns out, I'm not as cool as Branford and Kenny. So he needed me to shake my ass. We all ended up doing it. Kenny was behind the keyboard, so not him, but Branford got into the festivities eventually. But again, it was an odd dynamic because I was trying to be the cool, aloof, hipster jazzer, but Sting's like, we got to entertain the people. And he was right. So I discuss it in the book. They bring in a choreographer. He yells at us. He brings in a choreographer. So you still got to entertain the people. As I say in the book, people listen with their eyes too.
Yeah.
So
It's showbiz. You know, were you going by the name Jeff Campbell or Jeffrey Campbell, and then because of the tour, it became Jeffrey Lee Campbell? Because there's a part in the book where I forget which musician introduces you, and then Sting goes, "That's a great name." Like it sounds like Stevie Ray Vaughan. It has a thing.
Yeah, right.
Were you just Jeffrey Campbell before that, or you know, on anything?
I was always Jeff. And like I said in the book, I talk about the band would just kind of what's the word I want to use? As a term of endearment. Jeffrey Lee, what's up, Jeffrey Lee?
Right.
And I don't go by Jeffrey Lee, but some of my dear friends call me that almost as a term of endearment. My mother called me that when she was angry at me. Jeffrey Lee, get in here right now, you know.
Right.
But so they started calling me, and Sting thought it was kind of a cool name and said, you should use that. And I'm like, it's the name on my birth certificate. So you're right. And I mentioned the book, Jerry Lee Lewis, John Lee Hooker. So Jeffrey Lee Campbell.
Right. Right. And if a rock star says this is the name that works for you, you know, it's almost like if you took up smoking, like, why are you smoking? Sting thought it would help the tour. And, you know, like it happens that way. You know, I was going to post this interview to two different groups. One are those guys who know their deep cuts and B-sides, and like me, you know, and I think one of the questions that I would have asked if this was like a collector's forum, you mentioned that the deep cuts got sound checked, and you know, we each have our favorite. Like, did you guys ever play Secret Journey? Like, you know, Ghost in the Machine has all these wonderful deep cuts that didn't get the radio play of Spirits in the Material World. But what were some of the deep cuts where you had done the work, you had done the research, and Sting dusted off, hey, let's try this one, and you knew it? What's an example of one of those deep cuts?
Well, you know, I don't know. Again, it's a little blurry. It was 34 years ago, almost 33 years ago. So, but I do remember, and I mentioned in the book, and these aren't deep cuts, but we never played "Do Do Do," which I love that song.
Yeah.
And Sting refused to play it. You know, he's like, and we never played "Every Little Thing She Does Is Magic," which I love that tune.
Great song.
And we never played that tune. Yeah, we did play "Spirits in the Material World," which I look back on that and go, oh yeah, because we didn't play it all the time. And we played, I was like, oh yeah, I loved that tune. So I think of tunes like "Demolition Man," I always loved that we didn't play.
Yeah.
Some of the early Police, you know, we didn't play a lot of early Police stuff.
Right.
The other thing to me that's a huge disappointment, well, I shouldn't say huge disappointment, but I've seen Sting since then where they play Roxanne and Message in a Bottle with the full band. When I was in the band, Roxanne and Message in a Bottle were solo performances by Sting and his classical guitar. So I never got to play Message in a Bottle or Roxanne.
Right.
And to me, Roxanne is just one of the greatest tunes ever. That chink, 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 chink. I would have loved to have strapped on a Telecaster and played those quarter notes with Sting. But alas, he was playing that one solo in the encore.
You know, and that's one of those songs that when you hear Miles Copeland being interviewed, or any of them, you know, where it really was destined for the dustbin until the engineer plays it, you know, Nigel Gray, or like, play the tango. And then he goes, gentlemen, you've written a classic. And he takes it to A&M, and then the rest is history. But it was something they'd written off. They're like, it's a bossa nova. Like, you know, it could have.
I just read, I just recently read the book on Ted Templeman, who produced the Van Halen records and the
Right.
Doobie Brothers records. It's always amazing to hear those guys say, they thought What a Fool Believes by the Doobie Brothers was a complete dog. They thought Blackwater was a complete dog. Blackwater was the first #1 song by the Doobie Brothers. And you just don't know. You're in the studio, you're making music, I don't know, B-side, deep cut, whatever.
Yeah.
But what's funny about Roxanne, which to me is so infectious, how anybody ever missed the boat on that. But, people, they're not believers at first. But I remember Sting saying to me one time, he said, every town I go to, some DJ comes up to me and claims that he was the guy who broke Roxanne,
Right.
Every DJ goes, yeah, I was the first guy to play it. And in the next town, yeah, I was the first guy to play it. So what is it? Success has a million fathers, failure is an orphan, and success has a million fathers. So
I met a DJ who claimed that.
Yeah, when I hear Roxanne or So Lonely, those tunes make me, but I don't think I even went into this in the book, and I'm embarrassed to admit it. I was in Miami in the late 70s when the Police kind of hit the scene. And at that point, the Bee Gees ruled Miami. Saturday Night Fever was huge. The Bee Gees lived in Miami. So, and I was in jazz school, so I was listening to Quincy Jones and the Bee Gees and Earth, Wind and Fire. And I moved back to North Carolina in 1980, and my girlfriend's younger brother said something about the Police. And back then, nobody was named the anything. That was corny. Right. That was old fashioned. The Beatles, the Rolling Stones. You didn't have a name that had the in it. So it's like, the Police, who's that? And he said, you don't know the Police? And he's like, Message in a Bottle. And I'm like, no. And so at the time, Zenyatta Mandata had just come out, and he played it for me. And I was like,
yeah.
And huge fan ever since. I mean, when I heard Driven to Tears and When the World is Running Down, I was like, sign me up.
Yeah.
And to me, Zenyatta is still my favorite album, just because it was the first one that I absorbed.
Yeah. Well, when I emailed you to tell you how much I liked the book and to kind of explain what a fan I was, I think I mentioned I was in Amsterdam. I was in the Netherlands for a bunch of comedy shows, and I made a point of going to the studio where they recorded Zenyatta Mandata, Wisseloord, if I'm saying it right. I emailed them, and I guess it was just the oddest request they'd had that year. And like, sure, come on by and see the studio where we made this record in 1980. They were very nice. I ate in the cafeteria. But it's just a fan does that. It's not just like, oh, look where we are. It's an accident. I made a point of using my daytime on the comedy tour to go see it's like, oh, and there's the background you see on the photos on the back of the record. It's kind of funny. Like it's, there's the wooden wall from the photos on the album. It's just one of those things, fans are never.
Well, and invariably invariably the studios are kind of like, really? They're not near as glamorous as you think they're going to be, where the genius was created.
Yeah, it's a workplace. It's like, do you really want to go to the office where the guy wrote that article for the Washington Post? Do you really need to be there for, it's not it doesn't have that magic. But, it's one of those things, like if you're a fan, you're never ambushed like, oh, look at that. They have a new record out. Like you were there to get Synchronicity the day it came out. I remember getting to this record store at 9-something in the morning, thinking there would be colossal lines for Dream of the Blue Turtles. They simply opened the store. We'll be ready with you in a minute. And I got my copy. I thought for some reason there would be, it's just one of those things. We're never ambushed. We always know when it's coming out.
Right.
Nobody's caught off guard.
And I have to confess, maybe this is sacrilege to say this, but I still think Dream of the Blue Turtles is my favorite solo record by Sting. Maybe it's a point in time, but to me, Set Them Free is as good as it gets, I think.
Yeah.
Consider Me Gone, Set Them Free, you're just so good.
Yeah, I love Consider Me Gone. Fortress would have been a great Police song. That probably could have been.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, I do remember that in the souvenir program for the Sting tour. They said, which song, I was interviewed, and they said, which song are you the most excited about playing live? And I said, Fortress Around Your Heart. And I loved that tune,
Yeah.
And I had figured it out, sitting at home with my turntable when it first came out. And then when Sting picks up and plays, I go, oh, that's the fingering he's using. Same with Message in a Bottle. I made it much more complicated than it needed to be. And then you watch Sting play it. You're sitting on the couch going, wow, that's the guy who wrote it. Mm-hmm. This is the fingering to you. So, but Fortress, great tune.
You know, I think it's Vic Garbarini who'd written an article about the Dream of the Blue Turtles, and he mentioned the Sting's Ritz show where he unveils the band. I think it was Branford, as they're playing Bring on the Night and they're kind of vamping, it had turned into this stomping, thumping vamp. Branford, in the article that this guy wrote, says that Branford went over to Sting and whispers in his ear, "We could do When the World is Running Down, You Make the Best of What's Still Around." You know, he had caught this, like either the changes or the beat, whatever it was. Branford was responsible for it segueing from one song into the other. It was simply, you know, a raved up standalone, which is pretty cool. Like, he was a Police fan. That he had said, I think they said that Branford had been at the Shea Stadium show. Like, he was the one that said, let's do Tea in the Sahara, I think.
Well, and I have to point out, because this is always interesting, because the way we perceive authority figures or whatever, and you say, when you saw me in Syracuse, you're like, wow, that guy's as young as I am. Branford's younger than me.
Wow.
Branford's a year younger than me.
That's wild.
And he's a year older than Wynton. He's older than his brother Wynton, but Branford's a year younger than me. So, and again, so age is just a number. To me, Branford was my superior.
Right.
But turns out he was actually a year younger than me. Just a lifetime more talented than me.
Yeah. You know, really, it's along those lines, like, you know, age and then height. Let me just ask a weird question. How tall are you?
5'6" on a good day. You know,
I'm 6 feet tall, and I met Sting, and he towered over me. And I don't know if he was wearing like platform, like he just seemed gigantic. I met him at Andy Summers' show at the Ritz, right around the time Sting had either finished recording Nothing Like the Sun or whatever. Andy played a solo show for the XYZ tour, one of his first solo record, one of the early solo records. Sting just walked through the Ritz, and I said, "Sting, can I talk to you for a second?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, I took up the bass because of you. And he said, "How's that going?" And I said, "I'm not very good at it. I gave it to my brother, but I love comedy. That's where I'm going to put my energy." And he's like, "Good for you, blah, blah, blah." It just like, it took maybe 40 seconds. We chatted, but he was very nice, but he was gigantic. And I think we're both 6 feet tall. And I don't know if that's the aura of like, holy cow, it's Sting. Or maybe, I don't know. I'm 6 feet tall, and he was,
yeah.
he's
not taller than 6 feet. I think it is our perception. And first of all, he's got incredible posture. When he walks in the room,
right.
Chin out, chest out, you know, and it's from yoga and success. Mm-hmm. There is an aura there. But I've experienced that in life where I meet people and I don't understand the dynamic. And then we later become friends. I was going, wow, I thought this guy was taller than me when I first met him. And now I look at him, he looks smaller than me. It's just, I guess the situation, our perception is reality, right? So Sting feels 10 feet tall, you know?
Yeah. Jeff, I remember something from the show, and it's one of those things I'll never know the answer unless by some chance I happen to run into either Andy Summers or Clapton or Sting. But there were rumors in the crowd that Clapton was there as well. And after Andy finished his show, like it was definitely either lights up or, you know, the crowd's stomping and chanting, and the roadies brought out 2 extra microphones. So there were 3 vocal mics set up. Andy's that was on there, then another one, then another one. You know, those bent T
right, sure.
dealios. And the rumor was that Clapton and Sting were going to join Andy for like another couple songs. And I couldn't believe my good fortune. Like, oh my God. You know, I knew Sting was there. I saw him. And that's where I got that's where I got Andy to sign 2 records for me. But New York being New York, and people being drunk, and it being 1:30 in the morning, somebody started the crowd chanting, "Don't mean a thing if you ain't got that Sting, shoo-wop, shoo-wop, shoo-wop." And it just seemed like the rudest thing in the world. So even if they were ready to come out and play some Bob Dylan songs or whatever they were going to do, I think Andy said, "Fuck this, we're done here."
Well, I addressed a similar situation in my book. We were playing in Los Angeles, and Stewart and Andy were both backstage. And Sting's manager, Kim Turner, because Miles Copeland and Kim were kind of the 2 guys. Kim said, "Hey, Sting, you want to play a tune with the guys?" And, you know, we were only, 3 or 4 years removed from the Police at that point.
Yeah.
And Sting said, "No." And probably just like Andy said no that night, he's like, "No, this is the Andy Summers show." And And certainly I understand Andy not wanting to be overshadowed by Sting or Eric Clapton. I don't blame him. But even Sting was like, no, this is called message discipline. This is Sting's show. This is not police reunite. You know, this is nothing like the Sun in Los Angeles. This is not a police reunion where we're going to hack our way through a couple of tunes.
Right. So, what was the term used? Message discipline? Is that what you said?
Message discipline. Yeah.
Message discipline. That's a great way to put it.
Well, I hear politicians say that all the time about staying on message. Message discipline. Say the same thing over and over and over. And so I think Sting was like, you know, again, I'm totally speculating, but he was like, I don't care if Stuart and Andy are backstage. This is my night, you know. And they did not come out and play a tune. So
he really kept his path for a very, very long beyond anyone would have expected. Like, well, surely you'll do a reunion at some point. Just kept going, and really, to his credit, you know, navigating different genres. I love the Last Ship, the soundtrack, the musical. So good.
I saw the show twice. I saw it before Sting was in it, and then when he went into the cast, I went and saw it again, and I loved it. I thought the music was great. I hate to admit it, but I mean, I can be honest, right? I think the Last Ship rocks harder than 57th and 9th does. There's certain tunes on the Last Ship I'm going, this is piano just pounding quarter notes, and I'm like, I think there's some really great tunes on the Last Ship.
Yeah, I've enjoyed that record more than some of the solo stuff. Sacred Love, I played it, found it unlistenable, and put it away for a decade, took it out again and found it unlistenable. You know, but Last Ship is a masterpiece.
And I was excited for 57th and 9th because I had heard Sting was going back to his rock roots, but it didn't feel completely formed to me. And I'd heard they were trying to recreate the spontaneous, let's just go in the studio and see what happens. But, you know, that's a hit and miss proposition. And, you know, trying to recapture lightning in a bottle, you know, for any rock star is hard, you know, and I just felt that while I appreciated him going back to the rock thing, I'd even in my book, I wish for him to go back to the rock thing, the stripped down rock thing, and move back away from the world music and maybe a little too jazzy for some people's tastes. But 57 Night, I was like, kind of like, I like his other choices, you know, or ventures better. But anyway, you know, again, one has to keep in mind, when I was doing Nothing Like the Sun, it was only his second solo record. He was less than 5 years removed from the Police, right? I think, you know. So he was still a huge rock star, but known as the Police and trying to carve out his solo career. So I don't blame it at all for doing that. And I think that that's why we're playing such huge venues. And it's funny when you look for televised content, the only thing you can find us, we did Saturday Night Live. Yeah. And now today, everybody does David Letterman or Stephen Colbert or Jimmy Fallon. But Sting at the time, rock stars that big did not do late night TV. That was considered beneath you. No, you know, whereas I loved the David Letterman show. I talk about that in the book, how much I love that, because Hiram Bullock, the guitarist at the earliest band, but I never got to play on the Letterman show. And I would see Sting playing on Letterman with his newer band. I was going, but he was too famous for late night chat shows in 1987 and 88.
He, you know, Saturday Night Live, what a first gig for you, like out of the gate, to go from Hi, my name's Jeff to Saturday Night Live. That it was pretty much your first show with him. It's a show, there's a crowd, you know, it was only 2 songs. I watched the clip, you know, you mentioned having to tweak the amplifier, you know, taking time in the middle of the, like, you know, to have to, you know, and I watched the clip, like, there it is, just like it's described in the book. You know, it's very interesting that to be able to read about what was going on that day, and you being in the dressing room and you're with Steve Martin, like, it must have been so surreal.
Well, NBC is very proprietary with their content, so it's hard to find it. Every once in a while, that video will show up on Vimeo. It's not on YouTube, but then it'll show up on Vimeo and then get pulled back down. You have to watch it through NBC. It does exist on my website. I hope NBC doesn't come and threaten me to take it down. But I have a analog recording of it from VHS, so people can go to my website and see the Little Wing performance in low def. for sure. But yeah, it was an amazing thing. 2 weeks earlier, as I mentioned in the book, I was selling candy on Broadway.
Yeah.
I was 2 weeks removed from selling candy bars and cocktails in plastic cups to theater goers to being on Saturday Night Live with Sting. And again, we were not supposed to play Little Wing. We were supposed to play We'll Be Together and Be Still My Beating Heart. But one day at rehearsal, we played a version of Little Wing that blew the roof off the place. And Sting said, screw Be Still My Beating Heart. Let's play Little Wing. So because he was that impulsive, I went from being just the guy background playing rhythm guitar to having a featured solo. And to this day, people talk about, wow, the segue between you and Branford's solo on Little Wing on Saturday Night Live is one of the highlights of my life. I mean, I've had people write me and tell me they started playing guitar because they watched that show.
Wow.
So it was an amazing, I mean, and I think back, and the beauty was I was just young and dumb and fearless. Now I'd probably have a panic attack and faint. But at 28 years old, whatever I was, you just did it. You drank a lot of beer and did it,
And it shows a lot that Sting didn't choose his music. He went for a cover. It's Hendrix is hard to beat. If you're going to do a cover, it may as well be Hendrix. But let me shelve my song. I'm here to promote my stuff, but let's go with this. It says a lot that he was happy with that, and it was life changing.
Well, and it was for me. And again, it's like we talked about earlier. You have to entertain, and I think Sting in his gut knew this is much more exciting than Be Still My Beating Heart. I don't need the royalties. He had already climbed the mountaintop with the Police. He's like, I want to give the best show we can, not get a few more residual checks from one of my mid-tempo songs. So, he's smart. He was, he saw the entertainment value in Little Wing and went for it. And to me, covering classic tunes like that is a double-edged sword. I always raise an eyebrow if I see somebody covering an Aretha Franklin song or a Marvin Gaye song, or, in this case, a Jimi Hendrix song, because I go, those are the masters. You shouldn't go near their music. Be very careful. But Sting, he pulled off Little Wing, and ironically, I'd been playing that tune since I was a kid. Axis Bold as Love was my first introduction to Jimi Hendrix, and I was completely mesmerized.
Right.
I loved what Hendrix was doing.
And he's done a couple others, like there's tribute records. Wind Cries Mary, he's covered that, and it's really good. And then Purple Haze popped up live somewhere.
Yeah, when I saw him on the Soul Cages tour, they were playing Purple Haze, I think. And David Sanchez, who was playing keyboards, strapped on a guitar and ripped an incredible solo. I'm like, wow. I mean, Dominic, to his credit, but David was shining. I was like, wow, David Sanchez can play, So here's a guy who's been in Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band. I met him with Peter Gabriel when we did the Amnesty International tour. David Sanchez was playing in Peter Gabriel's band. But then he did Sting's Soul Cages tour as a keyboardist, but strapped on a guitar for Purple Haze and rocked out. Again, get back to my Amadeus Salieri comparisons. Right. David Sanchez is one talented cat.
Yeah. I mentioned how funny the book has, a lot of humor in it. One thing that wasn't what you wrote so much as what you observed. I love that there's a bootleg being played in your building that some guy had your LA show. That must have been so surreal to hear that. He probably wasn't doing it to tease you. He'd have to know your patterns, like Jeff leaves at 3 p.m. sharp. I'm going to play it at 3 p.m. Like, it's just a fluke that he was a Sting fan. Probably didn't even know who was living in his building, right?
Well, I'm sure he didn't. And it was right beneath me. And as I cynically say, self-critically, I didn't even know my neighbor's name. I'm walking down the hall, there's only 10 apartments in my building. There's 2 per floor. It's a 100-year-old walk-up building in Hell's Kitchen with 2 apartments per floor. And it's an old brownstone that they've chopped up into apartments. And I heard Squeeze blasting through his door, or what I thought was Squeeze. And the more I listened, I was like, no, that's me. And so I sat there and listened. And again, in the book, I say, I thought it was a bootleg because I didn't know that Sting had ever released Tempted. And like I said, I've heard from many readers around the globe to correct me and say, oh, no, it's on this B-side or whatever. So,
and I guess you were right. You can find the bootleg. Like, there's a soundboard version of that Will Turn
Yeah.
that Wiltern show that had Tempted, I found it. A buddy of mine is like a bootleg bloodhound, and he's like, "What, do you want me to find anything?" Yeah, soundboard Sting, and it's great.
Have you seen the artwork from that album?
Yeah, what is that?
They did artwork for the album. It came that close to being released. And somebody recently sent it to me, and it's just cartoon drawings of everybody, caricature drawings. I was like, wow, I'd heard they had done artwork. So it was that close to being released. I don't know why Sting pulled it, because he originally was going to release, which would have been great for my discography to say, oh yeah, you can hear me on. But unfortunately, I was released on some B-sides, but no albums.
I'm out of practice with segues for interviewing, but it's something I wanted to jump back to earlier in the early days. Sonically, the experience of where you're hearing a record, how you're hearing a record. And we all know the way it makes you feel if the record is wedded to an era. But when I was listening to the Police as a kid, it was on my Walkman or on my crappy stereo that I bought with my summer job money. So it was kind of a lo-fi experience. Outlandos d'Amour, like, it's a joyous, maybe not joyous, there's a lot of darkness in it, but it's such a fun record, and I'd never heard it played out loud. Somebody had a really great car stereo, and we were playing a baseball game, and they had brought the car as close as they could to the field and opened up like the trunk and all the windows and the doors and turned up Outlandos d'Amour on cassette back then. And to hear it that way sonically, it is an incredible record. There is something about the sonics that you get. I know that people will listen to a song of theirs sometimes on a car stereo they'll get something different than the recording studio. Have you ever done stuff like that where a different?
Well, yeah, now it used to be people would listen on their car stereo to make sure it would translate, making a transferable mix. You would make it sound great in the studio, but it always sounds great in the studio. It's $1 million space. And whether you whether it was the Beach Boys or whoever, they had it wired to their car stereo and they go out and listen to the car stereo. The version of that today is your earbuds. If it doesn't sound good on the iPhone and there's cheap white Apple earbuds, then it doesn't sound right yet. You have to make it transferable. But
right.
I have all that stuff on vinyl. I mean, that's when I bought it. Vinyl was still king, and it's scratched to hell because I wore it out. I do have a turntable, but I never really use it much. It is very nice feeling to hear that needle drop on the crackly vinyl. And but I do have the Message in a Box. I think it was the box set that has all this stuff. But now streaming, Spotify, if I want to listen to anything, I just dial it up in Spotify, which I heard a great line the other day. Somebody said, they call it streaming because it's made of musicians' tears.
That's funny.
Because they're making no money for it now. But I have to confess, I'm a Spotify guy. And the fact that I can type in Police or Willie Nelson or Chopin and have my pick of the,
it's like the Library of Alexandria.
That's technology.
But for music, it's, yeah.
Yeah. You can't. Now when I read a book about music, I always sit beside my computer with YouTube and Spotify. And like I read a book, The History of Louie Louie. And they start talking about the song and all the different versions of the old classic rock tune. And, so you dial it up on Spotify. You dial it up the same with the Ted Templeman book, talking about his early days. Find the YouTube performances. It's great to have the internet. And on my website, I have a page of videos that coincide with certain sections in the book. So when you read about us being in Argentina with Bruce Springsteen on the Amnesty Tour, there's a video to watch. Or at Wembley Stadium for the Nelson Mandela Freedom Fest, there's a video to watch. So we tried to make companion videos or post companion videos for readers.
It's the exact opposite of the collector in a way, where we want a tactile thing. I was going to show you, and you probably don't care the way I care, but when I was a kid, I would go into the city to hunt for B-sides, to hunt for records to get the B-sides. They were imports in New York. Here, they may as well be just giving them away free with every purchase. They're pennies here. Like this, I remember seeing the 12-inch, the DJ copy promo of Walking on the Moon. If it was in Greenwich Village at Bleecker Bob's or something, it would be up on the wall. It would be like $40. Hey, can I see it? No, you can't see it. And here, I saw it. It was in the front of a bin, and there were guys right near it. I'm like, don't they see what I was just waiting to get in there and think, don't they know what they're in front of? And it was just 5 pounds. And so it's just being able to have the tactile version of it, so different from streaming.
Well, I agree. I still have all of my vinyl records, and unfortunately I've realized that the ones I love are basically unplayable because they're so scratched from me being a 14-year-old kid listening to the Allman Brothers live at Fillmore or Led Zeppelin 4 or whatever over and over and over again and scratching them. So the records that are pristine were records that I didn't like. The records I loved are so scratched.
Yeah.
But I remember, I talk about in the book, I made I got to know John Bon Jovi years after the Sting tour. I gave him some guitar lessons. And I always remember what John said to me. He said, I hate MP3s because I buy them, then I forget I have them. You put them in that phone or whatever, and there's nothing tactile. And I realized I sound like grandpa, but man, when you would save your money and go buy a vinyl album, you listen to every cut over and over and over. There were no deep cuts. You loved every song.
Yeah.
And you read the liner notes like it was religion.
Yes.
I do music. I always believe that these are the good old days. I don't believe in the past being better.
Right.
It is what it is. But when I was growing up, you saved your money to buy vinyl. Music was not around you 24/7.
Right. It was
This
special.
is even pre-MTV.
Yeah.
It was special. You had to wait till Saturday night to watch Midnight Special or Don Kirshner's rock concert or something like that to even see a band on TV.
Right.
I mean, American Bandstand, but they were faking it. But at night, you would actually see the bands play on Saturday night, Friday and Saturday night.
Yeah.
MTV came, and even though there were videos, I could watch it round the clock. It was amazing to me. But as people joke now, they say, now if people had told you this 30 years ago, it's like, no, in the future, you'll pay for water, but music will be free. Nobody would ever believe that. Because when I was growing up, you got water out of the faucet free, and you paid for music.
And no sense of expectation. Like I remember, redialing WNEW in New York this day. Hey, can you play the live version of Wrapped Around Your Finger? This was just on the DJ copy. You couldn't get it in a store. It wasn't available. Hey, it's WNEW. What's your favorite radio station? WNEW. What do you want to hear? The live version of Wrapped Around Your Finger. Not commercially available. It's just, you would have to wait to get through. And, we already played it today, so not going to play it.
Well, yeah. I mean, when I was a kid and you were in the car and your favorite song, when you're 10 years old and your favorite song came on the radio, you always hear stories of people sitting by the radio with their cassette player trying to record their favorite song so they can listen to it over and over.
Yeah.
And even with MTV, as we moved into the internet world and people lamented the death of MTV, I wish they'd play videos again. And I remember somebody saying, why are you going to sit around all day long waiting for him to play Jump by Van Halen when you can just go to YouTube and watch it whenever you want to?
So true.
So it's great music is on demand. It's horrible that music is on demand. I don't know. It's like, it used to be really special when you'd sit there, MTV was like potato chips. Okay, just one more, one more. Because you kept thinking, 3 songs from now, they're going to show Spirits in the Material World or whatever, and you're going to be really excited. So.
And they'll tell you what's coming up next, that kind of thing. It occurred to me when the tour, getting back to the book, because that is the main reason I keep putting
available on Amazon.
Available on Amazon. I left a review there and I got your name right.
Yes, thank you.
The idea, like when the tour ended for you, it's kind of a return to the normal world. It's back to the mundane things. You have to do your own laundry. You're not getting room service. The way the pandemic has put a stop, I felt it as a comedian, like a year without shows, a year without the endorphins of total strangers cheering. Like the world kind of has put everything on hold that people once knew and loved. It felt like a strange time to be reading this book and, and like the glamour, the excitement, the newness of the tour. And then, it didn't come to a screeching halt. It was always finite, but, like, okay, the job's done. The garage door has been painted. The meal has been eaten, whatever it is, it's done. It's a finite thing. And it struck me as like, it's similar to the world now where, everything you knew and the excitement of it is on hold for the moment. Do you see what I'm saying?
Well, it goes away. And it was a double-edged sword, in my opinion, because Sting was so huge, he was not in the cycle of an emerging star. I had a friend at the time that was playing with Gloria Estefan in the Miami Sound Machine, and she was building her career. So it was album, tour, break, album, tour, break. So you could set your watch when there would be more work. When Sting finished, he said, well, I'm going to do Broadway for a while. He did Three Penny Opera on Broadway, although it was a complete flop. But, he was like, I don't know when I'm going to make another record. He was like beyond that point of his career. Whereas if you get in with an early band, obviously you're paying your dues and maybe not flying on private planes or whatever. But you have steady work, because when you're in, I'm trying to think of it, just any band that's mid-career, the next thing they have to do is make another record, then another record. But Sting had moved past that. So yeah, it ground to a halt. And I thought, as I mentioned in the book, I thought, well, I've got a lifetime membership in Club Rockstar. The phone's going to ring in a minute and somebody else is going to want my services. And that didn't happen. So it was quite a rude awakening. And I've always joked that's like, because I got the Sting gig 8 months after I'd moved to New York. When I moved to New York, I said, I'm going to give it 1 year and see what happens.
Yeah.
And as I mentioned in the book, the eve of my 1 year anniversary, I'm playing Madison Square Garden with Sting.
That's incredible.
And I think I've got this figured out. I've cracked the code. Of course, that didn't happen. And the analogy I always use, it's like winning the World Series or the Super Bowl your rookie season. And then you still have to play football for 20 more years.
Right.
And you never go back to the Super Bowl. And how do you, but as I say in the book, I'll choose too soon over never anytime, because there's a lot of guys that never get to play with Sting, that never win the World Cup or whatever. So, you take it where you can get it. And at the time, I felt like, I peaked too early. But with 30 years of perspective, I now think about it more as a legacy issue. And, when you read an obituary, at the risk of sounding a little morbid, it says Oscar winner so-and-so. It doesn't tell you what year they won the Oscar. They won the Oscar. That's all that matters, right?
Yeah.
So at the time, for the next 5 to 10 years, I was humiliated that I was not able to sustain. But now I've been on Broadway for over 20 years. I've had good years and bad years. The joke I always made was my first year in New York, I got the Sting gig, and I've been working my way down the line ever since. But I just recently read a book, and it's true. Your career's not a ladder. It's a jungle gym. You move up, you move down, you move sideways. Yeah. And now that I look back on it, I'm very proud to have Sting as a line on my resume, and it opened a lot of doors for me. But I no longer feel like, well, I was a winner for 1 year and a loser for the rest of my life. It's not that way. It was a great experience. And the book, I'm very proud of the book. I wrote it kind of as a labor of love for a legacy, but it's actually been getting great reviews. And I'm never going to get rich off of it. I'm not on a major publisher. It's like being on an indie label with your band. You just don't have the muscle to push the product. But I hear from people in Japan and Poland and Brazil. And I got an invoice last week from Amazon India. I'd sold a book in India. And I go, this is my compensation. I don't really need the $5 I make or whatever it is for the book. Yeah, right. But when you wrote me and said, I think you're a writer moonlighting as a musician, that made my day. So it's the happy readers are my compensation. Unfortunately, I've worked long enough. I'm at a point in my life where, if somebody wanted to give me $10 million, great. But a few bucks here and there is not going to really change my lifestyle. So I don't really look at the money anymore. I've got enough to pay my bills. So now it's just about trying to do things that I enjoy.
And that's success. When things kind of get back to a normalcy, where do you see? Are you going to be working on School of Rock, or what will you be doing next?
School of Rock closed in early 2019. Then I was subbing on Broadway shows throughout 2019, but I'd been working for a couple of years on a workshop for a new Michael Jackson musical. I know they had something in London like Thriller Live or something like that. But this is actually a brand new musical based on his life. And we've been working on it. And so it was set to go in 2020, then COVID hit. So it's been a kind of an interesting experience for me, because I know that I have Michael Jackson on the other end of this experience, which now I've been told, I think September 2021 for Broadway and Michael Jackson. I heard rumors that Hamilton might come back a little early, or some of the big hits, but I think I'll be on we hope that Michael Jackson will be open in September. So I've been working on and off on that for a couple of years, which I'm a huge Michael Jackson fan. I grew up on the Jackson 5, so I love that music, but Off the Wall and Thriller were right in that sweet spot of my life when I was around 20 years old. So, I mean, they were mind blowing. Billie Jean changed MTV. They didn't show Black artists until Billie Jean came along. When the full length Thriller video showed, the world would grind to a halt and watch Thriller. So I've always been a Michael Jackson fan. He uses the best musicians, great songs. And I'm telling you, this show is incredibly powerful. And ironically, I even talk in the book, I don't know if you remember, I was in Paris, and Michael Jackson was also in Paris at the time. And Branford and I went over to Greg Fillingane's hotel room. Greg was Michael's musical director and piano player. And Greg was kind of bummed. And I was like, man, you're playing with Michael Jackson. He's like, yeah, but Eric Clapton called me to tour with him. And I had to say no to Eric because I'd already accepted the Michael tour, which, much like Dennis Chambers, like, wow, nice luxury problem. Eric Clapton, Michael Jackson, what should I do? But I do say in the book, I go, you know, I just grew up on soul music and groove music, which is why I like the Police, because Stuart Copeland is a great drummer. It's funky on top of everything else. Yeah. And so I talk in the book, I go, you know, I respect Greg Fillingane's opinion, but I'm going, I think I'd rather play with Michael Jackson than Eric Clapton. I think it'd be more fun musically for me. So I mentioned in the book, I say, I'll burn in guitar hell for saying this, but if I got to play in the song night after night, give me Billie Jean over Layla.
That is a great song.
But, and if with a little luck, I will play Billie Jean night after night, starting in September.
And hopefully volume 2. I like, if you're going to write another book, I'm sure it'll be a blast and a fun read as well. So volume 2. I never knew how to say Fillingane's.
As we speak, I am writing another book. My publisher said, you got to write a book about COVID. New York City's a zombie city. Write a book about COVID. And I thought, well, I don't want to write a book about COVID. But again, I've been playing guitar professionally almost 50 years. And I only played with Sting for 1. So there's a lot of stories in there. From Broadway to Debbie Gibson to Sammy Davis Jr. I've worked with a lot of different people. So there's some crazy stories that I've decided to write a second book, and hopefully it'll be out by Christmas.
And I said in my review, while people are trapped with COVID right now, this is almost like a trip around the world, because you know, it's such a vicarious way to travel the globe. And the bonus is it's with Sting, it's first class. You know, it's a great way to get out if you can't actually get out. It puts you, the writing is so good, it puts you in these various exotic places, and that's a lot of fun. I didn't know how to say Fillingane's, and also Perosia, I never knew how it was pronounced. I feel richer and more well-informed from this.
I purposely wrote the book as a journal. If you read it, that's what I tell people, it's bite-sized stories. It's almost like reading my daily journal on the road for a year. It lists every gig. Some gigs have anecdotes, some gigs don't. But I felt very strongly about that. And I remember thinking, even if I landed a big publishing deal and they said, yeah, we don't like this format, I'd be like, no, this is the way the book's going to read. Because I hate it when I'm reading a book and I'm like, when does this chapter end? And I'm looking ahead to go, I need a break. When does this end? My book is not that way. It's like, you know, it's a page turner, but you can set it down at any time and pick it right back up, because it's short little stories.
I was so into one of the segments that the Northern line splits off, and I wasn't paying attention, and I went onto the wrong spur of the train line while reading this. I thought that was like, it is. You're like, oh my God, you know, it's not just missing your stop. I'm on a whole other part of London because I was. Thank you so much for making time, Jeff. This was a real treat, and I hope the book sells well, and I know it'll bring a lot of smiles to Sting fans and anybody who just wants to read a book that's fun and funny. Like you win on so many levels. It's a funny and enjoyable read, even if you're not a Sting fan. But if you're a Sting fan,
I recently had a guy say, "Oh, I really wish he'd talk more about his equipment and his practice regimen and you know, the technical aspects." I thought, people don't want to read that. Maybe some people do, but it really is a book about life. It's about your dreams coming true and the underbelly of your dreams coming true. And I try to write a book, a universal book. Everybody has this story. Young knucklehead learns the hard way. You know,
Right.
I got to do it with Eric Clapton and Bruce Springsteen and Sting as ringside seats, but it's a book that musicians can love and non-musicians. So that's what I tried to write.
Everyone loves an underdog story. I was rooting for this Jeffrey. I was rooting for the Jeffrey Lee Campbell character. I was like, please don't let it have a sad ending. And you know, like it was just, it's a triumphant book all the way through. Anyway,
Well, there's some redemption at the end, you know, and that's what I wanted. But it's funny when publishers, when I was trying to get the book published, they would always ask about, well, what's your platform? That's a code speak for how big is your fan base, you know?
Yeah.
I was like, I'm not famous. If I was famous, this book would have a very different ending. And I remember reading somebody say one time, celebrity memoirs are so boring. It's like, I struggled, then I got really famous and I had lunch with so-and-so. It's like, my book is Shakespearean. It's out of the blue, incredible success, then dealing with the downside of what happens when that, you know, the ride is over and how you cope with it. And so I like the fact that it has that shape of up and down. And like I said, there's redemption at the end, but it's not like, you know, with all due respect, I had to stop reading Stuart Copeland's memoir because I didn't really care about his polo games in Argentina. Just didn't care. I thought Andy's book was very good. I thought Sting's book was very good. Stuart's book, I couldn't get through it.
Andy's book is very funny. I read it twice. It's a great read. It's a great read.
Andy's book, I mean, Sting's book is a very different approach, which I went back and read it and I got where he was coming from. But at first I was disappointed there wasn't more police stuff, but it was really about what did I do to get to this point? But Andy's book, I loved.
Yeah.
So
he's
I tried to write a book like that people could relate to. It's not about me sipping champagne on polo ponies. Well, it is, but then I get my just reward at the other end for thinking I'm a big shot. So,
but it's a fair assumption. You had a good year. You're in with this life. You know, it's basically like you're playing with the Yankees unless they trade you or fire you. It's an assumption, you know, and a lot of directors, they keep the same crew. Like you'll be the sound guy unless something changes. Like it's understood. We'll just move forward as a team. So it's a fair assumption to make, but it was not in the cards.
Right. Well, I was naive, and I was more naive a year ago than I am today. It's like the naivete. May it stay with me my whole life because I don't want to be a cynic. But at 28, I was really naive about the way showbiz worked, and you know, so it was. But I'm internally indebted and grateful to Sting for hiring me. Changed my life.
It's a great credit to have. It's a certain immortality in a way, you know, you know, it's in the books. It's not even an asterisk. It's like this tour contained these musicians. What a credit to have.
And I always say to people, you know, there's only a handful of people as big as Sting. You know, I mean, first of all, he's got one name, which that's a short list of people that Bono, Sting, Cher, Madonna, you know, that kind of thing. But with all due respect, my hat's off to anybody that can figure out how to crack showbiz. Whether you're Hootie and the Blowfish or Led Zeppelin, congratulations to everybody. You figured out a way to get your music heard by the masses. That said, I am very aware that a Sting credit might be a little more valuable than a Rick Astley credit. Now, sure, it'd be great to go around the world with Rick Astley and play these venues and get cheers and all that. But with all due respect to Rick, which I liked his record, and I took so much hazing on the road because I would listen to Rick Astley. The rest of the band members like, Jeff, how can you listen to that? I was like, I like it. I like the production. I like the dance vibe of it. But my point being is I realized it's hard enough to get a Rick Astley credit, but to have a Sting credit, I'm incredibly blessed.
Congrats for getting that. That's something else. I'm grateful that you made time to talk with us, and I wish you all the best. And I hope our paths cross again one day. And anything I can do to help promote the book, I'll do it. And I'm going to post this on some of the Facebook groups, and I think they'll love the interview enough to buy the book.
Great. Thanks a lot, Mike. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Take care, Jeff.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.